an ambitious goal this evening to get through Lesson 10 in 1 week, because there's not much to this lesson if you've read through it. The title is a rather interesting one. Is the Bible filled with myths like unicorns? And really, the whole point of this argument in this lesson is that apart from contradictions that people like to turn to, well, this verse says this, well, this verse says this, that we've studied so far, or apart from someone coming along and saying the Bible's not inspired, my religious book's inspired, other attacks at the Bible are concerned about the language that the Bible uses. Well, don't you know that the Bible is filled with myths? And most of us, except for Henry, I think, have the ability on their tablet to turn their versions to the King James Version. And I need you to do that. And we'll get Henry to read some other versions, since I don't think you have the King James Version in front of you, Henry.
New King James.
Yeah, New King James isn't going to be good enough. Not tonight, because the word that I'm looking for is found in the King James Version. And the word that, but really the answer to the question of this entire lesson has to do with the fact that we have to turn to the King James Version to get the word. We've studied before that we have multiple versions in English, and using those multiple translations, we can understand what the Bible's talking about. And so when we run into a word that is only found in one version of the Bible, and one version really only, or older versions of the Bible, whereas the newer translations change the word into a modern English word, then we can really know, all right, we're not dealing with the issue that people think that we're dealing with. We're dealing with an issue where the word might have changed. So I'd like us to get, in the King James Version, Numbers chapter 23, verse 22. Naomi should have that. Tammy, Numbers 24, verse 8. Bill, Deuteronomy 33, verse 17. And I'm going to get Job 39, verses 9 and 10. And what I'd like us to consider here is, as we've talked before, the Bible sometimes uses figurative language. Is what's being described here figurative or literal? We'll start with Numbers 23:22.
God brought them out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of a unicorn.
All right, so he hath, as it were, a strength of the unicorn. Numbers 24, verse 8.
God brought him forth out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of the unicorn. He shall eat up the nations, his enemies, and shall break their bones and pierce them through with his arrows.
Okay. So we have the Numbers. Balaam is speaking in this chapter. He is prophesying in this chapter about Israel. Deuteronomy 33:17.
His glory is like the firstling of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together, the ends of the earth, and they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh.
Okay. So Moses is speaking here in Deuteronomy 33 towards the end of the book. Let's go to Job 39. This is God speaking here to Job. Job 39, verses 9 and 10. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with a band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valley after thee? We also could go to Psalms and Isaiah, but these will suffice for now. We have to ask ourselves the question, is what is being spoken of here, when it describes the strength of God, or it describes what God is talking about Job, about creation, is God speaking figuratively here, or is he basing his, or is whoever is speaking basing what they're saying on reality, on something that they have seen or can relate to. Something that they can relate to. Yeah. So we can't come along and say, like we can in the book of Revelation when it deals with dragons, that, oh, the Bible's speaking figuratively here. We can't come along and say, well, this is poetic language. We got to understand that it's being poetic. Balaam is saying God is brought them out of Egypt with the strength of a unicorn. If it's speaking figuratively, God's strength is figurative and not literal then. You got to be able to, if we're going to relate strength to something, we have to relate it to something that is strong. We can't come along and say, well, it is strong like an alien. Well, we don't know how strong an alien is. I don't believe aliens exist, by the way, but regardless of that fact, we don't do that. We don't come up with this made-up creature and say, well, we're as strong as that, or this person is as strong as that. God, when he is describing creation to Job, it would sort of go against God's speech to Job. Where were you when I did this? If he's now going to bring up some mythological creature, some horse-like creature with one horn that really didn't exist in that speech, now wouldn't it? You can't come along and just boil this down to a figurative versus literal. The Bible is being literal here when it speaks of, in the King James Version anyway, unicorns. So, here you have the atheists coming along. There are a great many of them who mock the reading of the King James Version. And some would say, I am an a-unicornist, just like I am an atheist. I don't believe, some would say, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in unicorns, nor do I believe in God. Others say there is as much evidence for unicorns as there is for God. Of course, you have Richard Dawkins saying he has disproved the existence of unicorns to extend his method to the question of God. Others would say, well, if you believe in God, you have to also believe in unicorns. And then you'll have the archaeologists who say, well, we've never found evidence for a unicorn. There's no fossils of them. And so how can you believe the Bible when it talks about this creature here that we can't find? They'll come along and boil this down to, well, the Bible's speaking of these same creatures like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, or other things like that, and mock the Bible for it. And you might think, well, why is there an entire lesson in this book that we're studying devoted to unicorns? Why is it important that we really look at it? And really, it's important because if the Bible is pandering to pagan mythology, if it is found within its pages, then how can we trust the Bible in other areas in regards to miracles that we find, the existence of heaven or hell, or God as the creator, or Jesus Christ as our Savior? If the Bible is claiming to tell us the truth about all things, is speaking literally in these passages about unicorns, then they must have existed. Maybe not the way we think we're picturing unicorns. That's where we're going with this. But we have to be able to trust the Bible when it comes to the things that it tells us. Henry can come back in, because we don't need the King James Version for this. You want to get 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15.
So it was
15, please.
15. And sanctify the Lord God in your hearts,
And always be ready to give the defense to everyone who asks for your reasons, purpose, and is in you with meekness and fear.
Okay. We have to be able to defend our faith. And so if we are to defend our faith, we have to not gloss over the passages that are hard, that maybe we don't fully understand. Coming along and saying, well, I don't understand that passage is not a bad answer, but if we just leave it at, I don't understand and I'm not even going to look at it, well, that's not a good enough answer. There are some times where we have to say, I just don't know. But I don't believe the unicorn question is one where we have to sit here and say, I just don't know. The writer of this book asks, are the unicorns of the Bible symbolic creatures? And he goes through the ones that we've just read and comes to the conclusion that no, they're not. And that's what we had just done. They might symbolize power. So that's important that we realize what they're being used for here is symbolic of power. So we are using literary devices. God isn't being described as a unicorn. He has brought them out of Egypt as if it was the strength of a unicorn. In Numbers 23 and 24. In Deuteronomy, his glory is the firstling of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. So in other words, we're describing something that has a lot of power. And so when we're examining unicorns and what the Bible's actually talking about, we have to be looking for animals. We have to be looking for animals that would symbolize that. If we say, okay, what is the Bible, what animal are we looking at? We can't be looking at a dog or a cat or something like that. When we think of unicorns, I forgot to say this, so what are we usually thinking of? Flying horses with one horn in the middle of their head. That's what you see a lot of in children's fairy tales. You see drawings of it. That's the animal that most likely, and when someone says unicorn, that's what they're thinking of. That's not what's being talked about here. And really, to answer the question, we have to do what we've already done which is, what do our modern translations use? How do they read? So let us go back and reread the passages that we've already read in order to understand what the modern translations say. We will start with the New King James. Amy, do you have the New King James on your Bible program?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like us to read through a couple of translations here. Not just one. So I'd like us to go to the New King James. Henry has that as his pew Bible. So, Naomi, you can reread Numbers 23:22. Tammy can reread Numbers 24:28. Bill, you can reread Deuteronomy 33:17. And Henry, you can this time get Job 39:9 and 10 in the New King James Version. You want to go, Naomi? So you can start.
God brings them out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox.
Okay, so instead of unicorn, we have wild ox here. Tammy, Numbers 24, verse 8.
God brings him out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox. He shall consume the nations, his enemies. He shall break their bones and pierce them with his arrows.
Again, Balaam speaking here. We have the use of wild ox, again, in Numbers chapter 24. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 17.
The New King James?
New King James, we got it.
His glory is like the firstborn bull. His horns like the horns of the wild ox. Together with them he shall push the peoples to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Moses.
Again, we have wild ox. Henry, Job 39. verses 9 and 10.
Because the white ox is waiting to serve you, that they held by your member, which you bind the white ox in the furrow with ropes, of which he plows the valleys into
Okay,
white ox.
wild ox, again. So that's the New King James. That's 1982. See what the newer version said. You guys, I know Henry doesn't. I'll have to read Job again. Does everyone have the ESV? The ESV is this century. Let's see if something has changed. We'll start again. Everyone has the same verse they've had before, except for Henry. He has to be. We'll get him later in a version that doesn't matter. But Numbers, chapter 23, verse 22. We've had unicorns in the King James. The New King James is pretty off across the board. Wild ox. Naomi, ESV.
God brings them out of Egypt and is for them like the birth of the wild ox.
All right. So wild ox again in the ESV in Numbers chapter 23. Numbers 24, verse 8.
God brings him out of Egypt, and is for him like the horns of the wild ox. He shall eat up the nations, his adversaries shall break them all to pieces and pierce them through with his arrows.
All right. Another one, wild ox. Phil, Deuteronomy 33, 33, verse 17.
The firstborn bull, he has majesty, and his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he shall gore the peoples, all of them, to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim and the thousands of Manasseh.
Okay. So we have a wild ox again. And then we'll come to Job 39, verses 9 and 10. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind him in the furrows of his ropes, or will he harrow the valleys after you? Wild ox is what's going to be translated in many of the versions for unicorn. The 4 French versions all refer to buffalo. The dozen Spanish versions also mostly refer to buffalo, but with wild oxen and the wild bull as variants. The Hebrew word is translated as ox or wild ox in every other English version of the Bible. Now, the writer asked the question, why do so many modern translations use wild ox or wild oxen? Technically, there is no such thing as a wild ox, because oxen are domesticated bulls. You don't find wild oxen. The English, so basically what we're talking about is an animal. An ox is domesticated, whereas the bull is not necessarily domesticated. But the English word unicorn in modern Hebrew is had keren, which is compound of 2 words, keren meaning horn, and had from echad meaning one. The term is clearly equivalent to the meaning of uni, one, and korn, horn. Now some believe the Hebrew term reem is actually derived from the Assyrian word for auroch, which was wild bull. Note the similarity between the Assyrian word rimu and the Hebrew word reem. When they are depicted on Ashurbanipal II's palace and stone prison of Esarhaddon, their profile gives the appearance of a one-horned bovine, or a cow. However, it is highly unlikely the Hebrews or the Assyrians borrowed terms from their unrelated languages in this case. And so is this, we get the idea that we're not talking about this mythological horse, this winged mythological horse here, because almost all of our English translations do relate to us some sort of beast that we can recognize. Well, that wild ox would just be a bull. that has not been domesticated. But is that really the animal that we're talking about? And if it isn't, then maybe we should consider what we are likely talking about. Because the King James Version did use unicorn. It could have easily used wild ox or another word. The King James Version actually followed the Latin Vulgate and the Greek Septuagint, which translated ram with a term meaning one-horned beast. Martin Luther also translated it into a similar German term. And as we know, words change meaning over time. It is also prudent for our translators to understand the meaning of a term as it was understood by those reading the Old Testament books. This is also true of the readers of the King James Version when it was published 400 years ago. In the original printing of the King James Version, the term unicorn, found in Isaiah 34, verse 7, also has a footnote that reads rhinoceros. In the Latin text of Job 39, verse 9, which we read 3 times, the Hebrew term is translated rhinoceros. Numquid, I'm not going to read the Latin. You can read the Latin in your book. I'll just butcher the Latin, and so I'll just let you do that. Out of the 9 scripture verses that mention unicorns, there are 5 different Latin words that are being used. Rhinoceros, rhinocerotis, rhinocerota, unicornium, and unicornus. Those are the 5 Latin words used when we're translating this. Back in 1828, if one looked up the definition of unicorn in Noah Webster's dictionary, they would find the following definition. An animal with one horn, the monosaurus. This name is often applied to the rhinoceros. If they turned back to read the meaning of rhinoceros, they would find a genus of quadrupeds of 2 species, one of which, the unicorn, has a single horn growing almost erect from the nose. This animal, when full grown, is said to be 12 feet in length. There is another species with 2 horns, the bicornus. They are natives of Asia and Africa. So whether one goes to the English of 400 years ago or 200 years ago, they would discover unicorn was another term for rhinoceros. It was not the winged horse mythological creature. When compared to biblical references portraying the characteristics of unicorns, it is easy to see how rhinoceros fits the description. A full-grown rhino has great strength, that Numbers 23 and Numbers 24 would say. They are not easily pinned in a normal animal corral, Job 39, verse 9. It would be suicide to try to hitch them up to a plow in Job 39, verse 10. We didn't read Psalms 29, verse 6, but had we read, they would have been known to skip when they move fast. They have one horn, or some of them do anyway. Psalms 92:10. Rhinos can push with their horns, Deuteronomy 33:17. And one would need great help to be delivered from the threat of the rhinoceros's horn, Psalm 22:21. Today, biologists and science in general recognizes 5 distinct species of rhinoceros. 3 of these have 2 horns, and 2 other species have 1 horn. In fact, the scientific name of the Asian one-horned rhinoceros, also known as the Indian rhinoceros and the Javan rhinoceros, is Rhinoceros unicornus. This is in contrast to the 2-horned black rhino known in science as Diceros bicornus, 2-horned. Unicornus and bicornus are Latin words. Scientists often refer to adult male rhinoceroses as bulls. And Eric Derenstein's book about the one-horned rhinoceros is titled The Return of Unicorns. And so, really, what we're talking about here is another example of people grabbing a verse, making it seem like it is saying one thing, when it actually is not saying that at all. The word unicorn is found. In fact, I don't know why wild ox is used instead of rhinoceros. I have no idea why rhinoceros is not used. But it's not. So even our modern translations are trying to maybe maybe haven't quite done the due diligence in maybe taking it back to where it should have. But the Bible isn't doing what the atheist wants it to do. It's not talking about mythological creatures. It's talking about a real creature. Rhinoceroses roam this earth today. Some of them have 2 horns. Some of them have 1 horn. And really, that's what a unicorn is. It's talking about its horn. An animal with 1 horn. But it's not talking about the flying horse that we see in kids' fairy tales. It is talking about a real animal. So we have a couple minutes. The dragon in the book of Revelation. People love to say, well, dragon's a mythological creature. You may have come and solved the problem with unicorns. What about dragons? Henry, what is a dragon in Chinese mythology?
Dragon is a favorite animal, or it can fly.
Okay.
Fly and pure out the water.
Okay.
He's a king of the oceans.
Okay. Does it breathe fire?
Yeah.
It breathes fire? Okay. That's typically what I thought the dragon would be. And people come along and say, well, the Bible speaks of dragons. Can't possibly be true. And my answer to that question is, okay, where do we come up with that? We often, in our imagination, I've been watching the imagination of children for a month, deal with imaginary things that children play. But it's always based on something that they have seen. Might be exaggerated into storytelling. But it's always based on something they've seen. Do we have flying animals today? Yeah, of course we do. We have birds that fly around, and we have big animals. You ever seen an eagle or a peregrine falcon fly? They're huge animals. And there's even bigger animals than that. We find fossils of dinosaurs that flew. Animals that you would think, oh, they can't possibly fly. And they can fly as well, if they have the wing structure for it. Are there animals that might breathe smoke? There's some. We have animals that light up. Yeah. Yeah, like as far as, yeah. So, my answer to that is, okay, these dragons that we're talking about, these large beasts that fly and perhaps even breathe fire, sound an awful lot like the creatures we unearth that we call dinosaurs. The Bible doesn't speak of dinosaurs by the name dinosaurs, because the word dinosaur didn't exist 200 years ago. That's what we have called them. That's our name for them. What might have the other societies, other cultures have called them? They most certainly would have had different names. And so when the Bible's using dragons, even figuratively, like it does in the book of Revelation, I believe it is talking about creatures that man has seen, that maybe don't roam this earth today, but did at one time. Just as I believe dinosaurs and man walked the earth at the same time, are not the absolutely vicious creatures that we portray them to be. So in other words, so to mean that we can't have walked the earth at this time, as dinosaurs, because certainly they would have eaten us. As if you've never walked into the forest with a grizzly bear, or a lion, or a tiger, or a cheetah, or any other great animal that walks this earth that is very ferocious, that I don't want to be caught dead coming in contact with. You're telling me that mankind has made up out of whole cloth an animal that we have not seen? I don't believe. Why are our aliens? Why do they always look like us? Whenever we draw aliens, they always seem to look like us. They walk on 2 feet. They might have a different skin color, but so do we. We have different skin colors. They all have their heads are shaped like us. They have 2 eyes in the middle of their face, a nose, a mouth. They look like us. Or they look like an amalgamation of some creatures that we have seen. We have not created things out of whole cloth. I believe dragons were real, but I believe we might call them dinosaurs today. Whereas before, other societies called them dragons. And they have become mythology, because we can make mythology out of anything. We can do that. We can make mythology out of anything. And we can even exaggerate some of the things that real creatures can do. So in other words, we can make up some things, and perhaps we have, about dragons. Whether they could breathe fire, I do not know. But I don't believe we made up dragons at all. I believe they are the dinosaurs that walked this earth. That have walked this earth, that have walked this earth in times past. Not so with the unicorn, though. The Bible's not speaking of a unicorn as this mythological horse. It's most likely speaking of a rhinoceros that still walks this earth, by the way, and fits in with our descriptions of it in the Old Testament. I'm not ashamed to hold my